$50 grand in crumpled, sweat-stained bills sat on a folding chair. Survive 30 seconds against a man whose knuckles dragged the canvas. 112 fighters had already left on stretchers. Then, a man in a simple tracksuit stepped through the cigarette smoke. He looked irritated. Blood always dries brown on unbleached cotton. That was the very first detail Bruce processed when he stepped into the subterranean boxing club beneath O'Leary's meatpacking plant. Ammonia and stale beer hung thick in the unventilated air, masking the sharper metallic copper scent that radiated from the center of the room. A single halogen bulb swung from a frayed wire, casting violent swinging shadows across the faces of dock workers, gamblers, and local enforcers. They were screaming, not cheering, screaming with the kind of ugly, visceral hunger that only surfaces when money and pain are on the line. In the center of the ring, fighter number 112 was currently discovering the limits of human cartilage. His name was Mitchell. Bruce had seen him fight in the Golden Glove circuits, 240 pounds of fast twitch muscle and Irish stubbornness. Right now, Mitchell was folded completely in half, gasping for oxygen that his crushed ribs refused to process. Standing over him, scratching a scar on his massive collarbone, was Harlan. Harlan wasn't a martial artist. He was an architectural anomaly, 7 feet and 2 inches of farm-fed density. He possessed the kind of sheer, functional mass that made technique look like a luxury. Harlan didn't look angry. He looked bored. He stared at the water dripping from the warehouse ceiling, while Mitchell spat a mixture of saliva and blood onto the stained mat. A bell rang. A rusted piece of iron struck with a wooden mallet. "Time!" a voice crackled through a blown-out speaker. Donovan, the promoter, climbed through the ropes. He wore a cheap polyester suit that smelled faintly of gasoline and cheap cologne. He stepped over Mitchell's twitching leg without looking down. In his left hand, Donovan held a battered leather duffel bag, unzipped just enough to show the green stacks of $100 bills. $50,000. It was a fortune in this part of town. Enough to buy a house, start a business, or pay off the kind of debts that usually ended with concrete shoes. "That makes 112, gentlemen," Donovan announced, his voice booming over the low murmurs of the crowd. He slapped the side of Harlan's massive thigh as if patting a prize stallion. Harlan didn't even blink. $50,000. All you have to do is stay conscious for 30 seconds. Just 30 seconds against the Appalachian Avalanche. Who wants to pay off their mortgage tonight? No one moved. The crowd shuffled, suddenly deeply interested in their shoes or the ashes on their cigarettes. Surviving 30 seconds against Harlan wasn't a fight. It was a demolition. Harlan didn't box. He trapped you in a corner and dropped his weight on you until something snapped. Bruce stood by the back exit, rubbing his right knuckle. He wasn't supposed to be here. He had come looking for a sparring partner, someone who could handle heavy contact for a new system he was developing. Instead, he found this circus. He watched Harlan breathe. He watched the way the giant shifted his weight. Most big men had terrible knees. They lumbered. They locked their joints, relying on skeletal structure rather than muscular control. Harlan was different. He moved on the balls of his feet. He had balance that was dangerous. A heavy-set man next to Bruce scoffed, spitting a wad of tobacco onto the concrete floor. "Nobody's taking that money. Guy's a freak, fists like cinder blocks." Bruce didn't reply. He was calculating variables, distance, reach advantage, the coefficient of friction on the damp canvas. 30 seconds was a lifetime in a fight, but it was also a strictly defined parameter. You didn't have to win. You just had to not lose. He began to walk down the narrow aisle. The crowd parted, mostly out of confusion. Bruce didn't look like a contender. He was 5'7", wearing a simple dark tracksuit and flat-soled canvas shoes. He didn't have the broad, trapezoidal bulk of the heavyweights who usually tried their luck. He walked with a relaxed, almost lazy gait, his shoulders dropped, his chin tucked slightly. "Hey, kid," Donovan said, leaning over the ropes as Bruce approached. He laughed, a dry, coughing sound. "Bathroom is back the way you came." "I have 30 seconds, Bruce said. His voice was quiet. It didn't boom or echo, but the sheer lack of inflection made Donovan pause. Harlan finally looked down. The giant's eyes were flat, dull. He had spent the last 2 hours breaking men who looked significantly more threatening than the man standing in front of him. Are you serious? Donovan wiped sweat from his forehead, looking at the crowd. A few people started to laugh. Look, pal, I don't want a murder charge. He's got 100 pounds on you, 200 maybe. 215, Bruce corrected. He placed his hands on the top rope. The texture of the rough hemp felt grounding against his palms. And his center of gravity is too high. You said 30 seconds. Put the bag on the chair. Donovan stared. Then, a slow, greasy smile spread across his face. Your funeral, friend. Sign the waiver. Bruce didn't sign anything. He slid between the ropes, his canvas shoes squeaking slightly as they found the dry spots on the mat. He didn't stretch. He didn't bounce on his toes. He simply stood in his corner, eyes locked on Harlan's sternum. You never watch the eyes? The eyes lie. The chest tells you everything. When they breathe, when they shift, when they tense to strike. The crowd went dead silent. The mockery died in their throats. There was something deeply unsettling about a man who walked into a cage with a monster and didn't show a single ounce of fear. But Bruce wasn't fearless. Fear was a biological necessity. It dumped adrenaline into the bloodstream and dilated the pupils. He felt the cold sweat prickling at his hairline. He felt the slight, involuntary tremor in his calves. He just refused to let the fear dictate his mechanics. 30 seconds, Donovan yelled, stepping out of the ring and raising his hand. Harlan cracked his knuckles. The sound was like dry branches snapping underfoot. He took a heavy step forward, dropping his massive arms to his sides. He wasn't even going to guard his face. Time, the mallet struck the iron. Canvas always lies. From the outside, a boxing ring looks flat and forgiving. Beneath his feet, Bruce felt the truth. Uneven wooden planks, dips where the padding had completely worn through, and slick patches of sweat and spit. He had to map the terrain instantly. Seconds 1 through 3. Harlan didn't charge. He surged. For a man weighing over 350 pounds, the acceleration was terrifying. The air in the ring actually displaced, hitting Bruce's face a fraction of a second before the giant did. Harlan threw a looping right hook, a lazy, arrogant strike meant to decapitate. Bruce didn't block it. Blocking a moving mass of that size would shatter the radius bone of his forearm. He slipped underneath, bending his knees and dropping his center of gravity to the floor. The fist passed over his head. The wind of it burned his eyes, but Bruce miscalculated the follow-through. Harlan's sheer girth meant his bicep dragged across the top of Bruce's skull. It felt like being scraped by a brick wall. The impact jarred Bruce's neck, sending a spike of hot, white pain down his cervical spine. His vision blurred for a microsecond. Imperfect, Bruce thought, his teeth clicking together hard. Too slow. Seconds 4 through 8. Bruce pivoted off his back foot, circling toward the center of the ring. He couldn't get trapped in the corners. The ropes were loose. If Harlan pinned him against them, the giant would just lean his weight forward and crush Bruce's lungs. Harlan turned, slightly annoyed now. The crowd erupted into a chaotic wall of noise, screaming for blood. Harlan lunged again, this time leading with both hands, a bear hug intended to snap Bruce's spine. Bruce stepped into the attack instead of away from it. It went against every survival instinct his brain screamed at him, but stepping backward meant hitting the ropes. He stepped inside Harlan's massive guard, right into the sour metallic smell of the giant's sweat. Bruce fired a short, compact punch, a 1-inch drive straight into Harlan's solar plexus. It was a perfect strike, mechanically flawless. It carried the kinetic chain of Bruce's entire body weight, driving through the floor, up his hips, twisting through his shoulder, and terminating at the knuckles. Harlan grunted. It sounded like a car door slamming. But he didn't stop. The sheer layer of dense muscle over the giant's ribs absorbed the shock. Harlan's massive arms closed in. Bruce had to contort his spine violently to the left, feeling the connective tissue in his lower back scream in protest. Harlan's hands clamped shut on empty air, the force so violent his own gloves slapped together with a loud crack. Seconds 9 through 15. Bruce's breath came in a sharp hiss. His right shoulder throbbed. The adrenaline was masking the worst of the neck strain, but he knew his reaction time was bleeding away by fractions of a second. He was expending too much energy trying to manipulate Harlan's mass. Physics, Bruce reminded himself. Stop fighting the mass, fight the foundation. Harlan was frustrated now. The bored expression was gone, replaced by a flush of red creeping up his thick neck. He swung a devastating backhand. Bruce dropped, sliding his left foot across a sticky patch of canvas. He felt his shoe catch. A momentary hitch. He compensated by falling into a crouch, letting Harlan's arms sail over him. While he was low, Bruce targeted the giant's lead leg. He didn't aim for the knee. The knee was braced. He aimed for the common peroneal nerve just below the knee joint on the outside of the calf. Bruce unleashed a low, whipping kick. The instep of his canvas shoe cracked against Harlan's flesh. It felt like kicking a fire hydrant. Pain shot up Bruce's shin, a dull, vibrating ache that made his teeth ache. But it worked. Harlan roared, not in agony, but in sudden, shocking loss of control. The nerve strike deadened the giant's leg for a fraction of a second. His massive frame buckled slightly to the right. The floorboards groaned as 350 pounds suddenly shifted off balance. Bruce didn't retreat. He couldn't. Harlan was falling forward, and his sheer flailing bulk was going to crash down right on top of him. Bruce pushed off his aching leg, throwing his shoulders forward to slip under Harlan's collapsing armpit. He smelled the heavy, rancid odor of cheap laundry detergent and old leather. Harlan crashed to his knees, his massive hands slapping the mat to catch himself. The ring shook. The halogen light above swung wildly, casting disorienting strobes across the bloody canvas. Seconds 16 through 20. Bruce backed away, chest heaving. His left shin felt like it was on fire. His neck was stiffening rapidly. He glanced at Donovan, who was staring at his stopwatch, his jaw slack. The crowd was completely silent now, save for the hum of the warehouse generators. No one had put Harlan on his knees, not in 112 fights. But Harlan wasn't done. The giant looked up. His dull eyes were suddenly wide, glassy with pure, unadulterated rage. He didn't stand up. He surged forward from his knees, a terrifying scramble of meat and bone, lunging out to grab Bruce's ankle. Bruce tried to step back, but his heel hit the bottom rope. He was trapped. Mass was coming. The clock was ticking. The canvas offered no escape. Fingers thick as lead pipes clamped around Bruce's left ankle. The sensation wasn't just tight, it was mechanically crushing. Harlan didn't grab the fabric of the tracksuit. He bypassed it entirely, his grip locking directly over the Achilles tendon and the fragile malleolus bones of the ankle joint. Instantly, a sharp electric spike of agony shot up Bruce's calf. The giant's thumbs dug into the soft tissue, threatening to separate the tendon from the heel through sheer, brutal compression. Panic is a cold, metallic taste at the back of the throat. Bruce felt it spike, a deeply ingrained mammalian response to being caught in the jaws of a larger predator. His heart rate hammered against his ribs, pushing blood so fast his ears rang with a high, thin whine. He had to suppress the urge to kick wildly. Thrashing against a closed loop of that much mass would only snap his own tibia. Seconds 21 through 25. Harlan yanked. He didn't pull with his arms. He threw his 350-pound torso backward, using his entire skeletal structure as a lever. Bruce went airborne. The friction of the canvas ceased, replaced by a sudden terrifying weightlessness. He flew forward, his left leg stretched taut, entirely at the mercy of the giant's momentum. He hit the mat hard, chest first. The impact forced the oxygen from his lungs in a sharp, ragged bark. Stale sweat, copper, and the distinct dusty smell of dried blood flooded his nostrils. Splinters from the worn floorboards beneath the thin padding scraped against his jawline. 22! Someone in the crowd screamed. It wasn't a cheer. It was a countdown to a slaughter. The spectators were pressing against the ropes now, their faces twisted in grotesque masks of morbid anticipation. They smelled the end. Harlan didn't let go. Still on his knees, the giant began to drag Bruce toward the center of the ring. Bruce's hands scrambled against the mat, his flat-soled canvas shoe on his free right foot desperately seeking purchase. His fingernails tore against the heavy seam of the canvas, bending backward. The friction burned his palms, peeling away the first layer of skin. Harlan was reeling him in, hand over hand, dragging him into the kill zone where he could drop his massive knees directly onto Bruce's spine. Mechanics, Bruce's mind demanded, slicing through the red haze of pain. Find the fulcrum. Bruce stopped resisting the pull. Instead of clawing away, he used Harlan's own pulling force, twisting his hips violently to the right. He flipped onto his back, his spine protesting loudly as it ground against the uneven floorboards. He was now face to up, staring at the swinging halogen bulb and the sweating, furious face of the giant looming over him. Harlan raised his right fist. It looked like a bruised cinder block dripping with someone else's dried blood. He held Bruce's ankle high with his left hand, pinning the leg in the air, preparing to drive the right fist down like a piston through Bruce's ribs. Bruce had exactly one fraction of a second before his sternum was crushed. He didn't aim for Harlan's face. He aimed for the wrist holding his ankle. Bruce snapped his free right leg up, driving the heel of his canvas shoe directly into the radial nerve on the inside of Harlan's forearm. It wasn't a clean strike. He was lying on his back, his leverage severely compromised, and the angle was awkward. His heel glanced off the thick, sweaty muscle, only partially connecting with the nerve. It was enough to cause a spasm, but not enough to break the grip. Harlan's fist hesitated at the apex of its swing, his thick lips pulling back over yellowed teeth in a snarl of irritation. Bruce didn't wait for a second chance. He reached up with both hands, grabbing his own trapped thigh, and violently rotated his trapped leg inward. The sudden torque strained his knee joint to the absolute limit, cartilage grinding audibly. But it shifted the alignment of his ankle within Harlan's fist. With a sickening rip of cheap canvas and tearing skin, Bruce kicked backward. His foot slid out of the shoe entirely. The flat-soled canvas shoe remained locked in Harlan's fist. Bruce scrambled backward like a crab, his bare left foot slipping frantically on the slick mat. He pushed off his hands, rolling backward over his own shoulder in a desperate, ugly somersault. He didn't land in a perfect martial arts stance. He stumbled to his feet, his chest heaving, his left ankle throbbing with a deep bruised ache that made it nearly impossible to bear weight. He tasted blood. He had bitten the inside of his cheek during the impact. He spat a crimson string onto the canvas. His left sock was already soaking through with a dark red stain where Harlan's fingernails had gouged the flesh. Harlan looked at the empty shoe in his hand. He blinked, the dull gears in his head turning slowly. Then, he threw the shoe out of the ring. It hit a spectator in the chest. Harlan stood up. He didn't rush. He rose to his full 7'2" height, his massive shoulders blocking out the dim light of the warehouse. He was breathing heavily now, a wet, rattling sound in the back of his throat. The nerve strike to his leg had faded, replaced by pure adrenaline. He cracked his neck, the sound echoing like a dry pistol shot over the murmuring crowd. Bruce stood by the far turnbuckle, his back inches from the ropes. His bare foot felt every groove and sticky patch of the canvas. He was unbalanced, operating on one good leg, his neck stiff, his lungs burning. He dropped his hands to his waist, letting his shoulders slump. He looked entirely defeated. 25 seconds, Donovan's voice cracked over the loudspeaker, entirely devoid of its previous amusement. 5 seconds. In a controlled sparring match, 5 seconds is nothing. A brief exchange of jabs, a reset of distance, a breath. In O'Leary's basement, trapped with a man actively trying to detach his head from his shoulders, 5 seconds felt like a slow, agonizing crawl through wet cement. Harlan didn't charge this time. He walked. It was a heavy, rhythmic stomp that shook the wooden planks beneath Bruce's feet. Harlan raised both arms, creating a wide, inescapable cage of bone and muscle. He was going to corner Bruce, pin him against the rough hemp ropes, and use his 350 pounds to smother whatever life remained. Bruce forced his breathing to slow, in through the nose, expanding the diaphragm, Out through the mouth, a thin, controlled stream. He couldn't retreat. The ropes were rigid behind him, offering no elasticity to absorb an impact. He couldn't move laterally. His injured left ankle throbbed with a dull, sickening rhythm, promising to buckle if he tried to pivot sharply. He had to stand his ground. It violated every fundamental rule of physics he had ever studied. You do not place a 140-pound frame in the direct path of a moving object, triple its mass. Seconds 26 and 27. Harlan closed the distance. The smell of him was overpowering now, a pungent mix of old adrenaline, stale beer, and the metallic tang of dried blood on his knuckles. He lunged, dropping his chin, leading with a sweeping left hook that was less of a punch and more of a swinging tree trunk. Bruce didn't block. He couldn't duck. Instead, he stepped forward, directly into the pocket of the strike. It was a terrifying, counterintuitive movement. By stepping inside the arc of the swing, Bruce bypassed the heavy fist-sized meat of Harlan's hand, placing himself directly against the giant's massive bicep. But the kinetic energy was still there. Harlan's arm crashed into the side of Bruce's head and shoulder. The impact was catastrophic. A flash of brilliant white light exploded behind Bruce's eyes. The sound in the room vanished entirely, replaced by a high, deafening tone. He felt the connective tissue in his right shoulder tear, a hot, ripping sensation that radiated down to his fingertips. His knees buckled under the sheer downward pressure of Harlan's arm. "Stay up!" his mind screamed. "Do not go to the floor." Seconds 28 and 29. Bruce bit down on his own tongue to stay conscious. The coppery taste of fresh blood flooded his mouth. He was pressed flush against Harlan's chest, trapped in the smothering heat of the giant's torso. Harlan grunted, shifting his weight to wrap his massive arms around Bruce's ribs, preparing for the final crushing bear hug. Bruce used his only remaining advantage: proximity. With his right arm completely numb and hanging uselessly at his side, Bruce drove his left elbow upward. He didn't use a swinging motion. He planted his bare left foot onto the canvas, ignoring the screaming pain in his ankle, and thrust his hips forward, channeling the kinetic energy directly up his spine. The point of his elbow struck the soft tissue just below Harlan's jawline, digging deep into the carotid sinus. It wasn't a knockout blow. Harlan's neck was too thick, insulated by layers of muscle. But the sudden sharp compression of the artery sent a shock wave to the giant's brain, causing a momentary disruption in blood flow. Harlan's eyes rolled back slightly. His grip faltered, the crushing pressure on Bruce's ribs loosening by a fraction of an inch. Bruce didn't wait. He threw his entire body weight backward, violently tearing himself out of the giant's embrace. He stumbled, his bare foot slipping on a patch of sweat, and crashed hard against the corner turnbuckle. His injured shoulder slammed into the unpadded steel ring post. Pain radiated through his chest, paralyzing his lungs. He slid down the ropes, his vision swimming, the high-pitched ringing in his ears slowly giving way to the chaotic, deafening roar of the crowd. Harlan shook his massive head, a thick string of saliva hanging from his jaw. The giant roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated frustration, and took a massive, stomping step toward the corner. He raised both fists high above his head, preparing to bring them down on Bruce's skull like a sledgehammer. Bruce looked up. He couldn't raise his arms, he couldn't move his legs. He sat slumped against the bottom rope, breathing through teeth stained red with his own blood. He watched the giant's fists reach the apex of their swing. Clang, clang, clang. The rusted iron bell shattered the heavy air of the basement. Harlan froze. His massive fists hovered inches from Bruce's face. The giant's chest heaved, his dull eyes staring down at the bruised, bleeding man slumped in the corner. For a long, terrifying moment, Bruce genuinely believed Harlan wasn't going to stop. He believed the bell didn't matter. Then, Harlan dropped his arms. He spat a thick wad of phlegm onto the canvas, turned his massive back, and lumbered toward his own corner, rubbing the red mark under his jawline. Bruce didn't stand up immediately. He let the cold draft of the warehouse wash over his sweating face. He touched his tongue to his teeth, checking for fractures. He tasted copper and cheap canvas. Donovan climbed through the ropes, his polyester suit suddenly looking incredibly expensive. He carried the battered leather duffel bag. The crowd was silent, a heavy, stunned quiet that felt more reverent than any applause. Donovan walked over to the corner and dropped the bag next to Bruce's bloody bare foot. 30 seconds, Donovan said, his voice quiet, lacking the arrogant boom from earlier. He stared at Bruce's torn sock and the rapidly swelling lump on his jaw. "You're a crazy son of a bitch, you know that?" Bruce didn't smile. He didn't offer a philosophical quote. He slowly, painfully pushed himself up the ropes, favoring his good leg, clutching his numb right shoulder. He looked at the $50,000 in crumpled bills. Then he looked at Donovan. "Keep the bag," Bruce rasped, his voice raw and ragged. "Just give me a ride to the hospital." The true cost of survival isn't measured in dramatic victories. It's paid in torn cartilage, bruised bone, and the terrifying willingness to stand your ground when every instinct screams to run. Did this breakdown change how you view the reality of combat? Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to understand the brutal mechanics of survival. Stay grounded, stay sharp, and never underestimate the physics of a fight.